Welcome back, dear viewers. Our first guest of the evening is Dr. Asmaa Alduhaim, Assistant Professor of Translation. Dr. Asmaa, good evening.
Good evening.
We really enjoy having especially professors when it comes to translation.
Thank you.
Welcome to Halakwet tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Asmaa, I'm really excited to have you with us also this
Thank you.
evening because a lot does get lost in translation, and I think
Indeed.
you're here to teach us a lot. So in the beginning, what's the difference between to translate and to interpret?
That's a very good question, actually, because we need to differentiate between the two. They are completely different carriers. They have completely different career paths. They have completely different set of skills. So basically, to interpret is to translate or to transfer meaning through oral words, orally in summits, in big conferences,
Yes.
on TVs. However, when you translate, you're doing it written-wise. You are just writing words and you're transferring meaning through words.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So a lot of us, Muhammad, do get confused between the difference.
It's really confusing sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of students do that too.
Yeah.
They say, what's the difference? Can we do
Yes.
both? Unfortunately, a lot of people can't do both. They can only translate or interpret. A lot of
Yes.
people can do both as well.
So we won't be seeing a lot of people that are doing both. Usually someone
Yes,
will be
it's
more
way
specialized
less.
in one
Yes,
or the
yes.
other. So how do we know if it's a good translation? Because we have seen some really bad ones and they
Exactly.
tend to be really funny and go viral on social media.
Exactly. I remember seeing a lot of text, especially when you translate movies, subtitles.
Yes.
There's completely different saying, especially when it comes down to cultural idioms
That's
or
right.
cultural words. Like we have a lot in the American accent or the dialect and the British dialect, and then the translation is completely different.
That's right.
Because they translate literally, which is basically just the Google translation
Yes.
or the dictionary translation, not the culture itself. The good translation will be that you as an audience, you understand it and it relates to you and it has the same effect that the source text or the thing that you're translating, it has exactly the same effect within that. So here comes that as a good translation. And of course, it has to be good grammatically. It has to
Yes.
be written in a good style that
Definitely.
conveys the language that you're translating to.
So
Definitely.
definitely like a good translation would be portraying the meaning of the word rather than just a direct translation.
The meaning and the effect as well that the source text has.
Yes,
Exactly.
for sure.
Some people went far also. They go to YouTube and translate also the script,
Yeah.
which sounds robotic, like when you
Yeah.
when you hear it.
Yeah.
So when it comes to people who are willing to translate or study translation, do they are there certain skills we need to
Yes.
become translators?
Yes, of course. This is something a lot of people don't know. They think that when you translate, you should be just like Google. You put the words in a dictionary and then you come up with the meaning and then that's it. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Otherwise, our job will be completely easy. You basically need to be involved in the culture. So if you are going to translate something into English, you need to be involved in that culture. If you are translating into Arabic, you need to be involved in the Arabic culture because language is intertwined with culture. So you need to be aware of the culture. You need to be a good researcher. Because you need to research every term and then find the best equivalent for it in the other language. Also, of course, you have to be fluent in the language, not just
Right.
like speaking wise, but also writing, as in style, grammar, and all of that. The beautiful things that the students hate.
Yeah,
For sure.
Yeah, definitely. Doctor, may I ask you a question out of the subject a little bit? Like,
Yeah.
mostly we notice like when people travel to some countries,
Yeah.
they need translators.
Yes.
And like when they choose the translators, some of them you feel they're active. Some of them, when you ask them, they're yawning. And sometimes between me and myself, I say, their Google Translate needs an update.
Yeah.
Like when it
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
of them
exactly.
translating. So how do we know, like, is there any special characteristics for when it comes to translators,
Yeah.
especially when we travel?
Yeah. So when you're traveling, basically you need an interpreter. An interpreter is someone who is going to interpret or translate the meaning orally. So that's the person you need. They need to be really quick, because they're going to have to grasp the information and then try to re-say it in a different language.
Yes.
They need to be able to actually pay attention to details, and they need to have a good memory because they need to understand everything you said, memorize it or remember it, and then re-say it in a different language.
That's right.
They also need to be aware of details
Exactly.
because, you know, when you say a lot of things, like assuming you go to a restaurant or God forbid, a hospital, and then you say, those are my symptoms, and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. If they don't have a good memory, they will skip 1 or 2, and then you might be diagnosed with something else other than whatever you are.
Really sensitive.
Yeah. So they need to be really attentive to these details. Being an interpreter is really hard. It's way harder than being a translator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking about Blaine, because we have changed the subject a little bit.
Yes.
So let's go back to the translators.
Yes.
How strong, how strong a translator can be, like when, let's say, 2 languages, like if you want to translate from language to other.
Like 2 non-mother languages, like let's say we can speak English and Arabic, but
tell me more about the strength, please.
You have to be, first you can always interpret or translate into your mother tongue.
Yes.
But in order for you to do with other languages that are not your mother tongue, you need to be very, very fluent with that. And when I say fluent, I don't mean like a dialect fluent.
Right.
Like a very good example is Arabic. A lot of the students, they're very good. A lot of us here, we speak Arabic, but we cannot translate into Arabic.
Definitely.
We cannot interpret into Arabic because that modern standard Arabic, which is completely different, it's the Fusha. So that's completely hard. And a lot of people find it really hard to translate into. So they say, oh, we can do it into English, not into Arabic. So that's something we need to be aware of. We need to have very good language skills, like writing skills and knowing the grammar of that language, everything, because one simple mistake can change the whole meaning of the content.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So I know that it might take several years to really know the language really well. Yeah. But when it comes to translation, how long does it take to master translation?
As long as you want. It's all about practice. So if you're a good student or you're a good translator and you want to practice every day, then you will acquire it really faster. Of course, there are different genres. If you want to be a very good translator in the medical field, then you need to specifically study medical jargon and stuff like that. So I'd say roughly 2-3 years if you're really practicing every day. Unlike interpreting, that's completely different. You need more practice and you need different kinds of training, not just writing.
Exactly. So when it comes, tell us more when it comes to interpreter or translator, what are the common mistakes let's say they fall in?
I think when it comes down to interpreting, the common mistake is basically when they just stop and they listen to what the person says, and then after they stop, they will want to interpret everything, and then they fall into the mistake of not remembering everything and completely, or saying basically everything, translating everything literally word for word. And when it comes down to translation, is using the dictionary in the wrong way. So they will just see one word and its meaning, and then they just take it, put it inside the sentence or into the sentence, into that context, without really seeing the bigger context or the bigger meaning.
And Doctor, you also mentioned in the beginning that usually you're either a translator or an interpreter.
Correct.
So what are the different skills that an interpreter might need that a translator doesn't have?
Well, when it comes down to an interpreter, it's someone who likes to talk.
Yes.
And someone who likes to talk fast. So that's why I always talk fast and speak fast, because we have to speak fast so we can actually share the information.
Right.
We have to remember a lot of details. You have to be attentive to all the details. You have to remember everything, and you have to be aware to summarize and sometimes simplify the information if it's very hard and you need to just like summarize it. When it comes down to the translator, you have all the time in the world, so you need to just be a good in writing, and a researcher, so you can just carry out the same meaning, basically.
Exactly.
Right.
Doctor,
Go ahead.
Rita, you reminded me of something, and also you, Doctor, you reminded me of the mental awareness, or like being attentive. When it comes to being attentive as an interpreter, tell us more, or as a translator, tell us more, please, about the exercise. Do we need to exercise mentally?
Yes. There are a lot of exercises, actually, and they do that, believe it or not, in the UN, for the interpreters in the UN, because they cannot afford to do any kind of mistakes, because they're interpreter for presidents and the world leaders. So they do that a lot. You have to actually do these trainings every day, so you remember everything. And it's basically different kinds of skills that you train your mind to listen to different things and then you name them, especially when it comes down to the difficult things, which are numbers, names, because it's very hard to remember names and numbers.
That's right.
So they also use notes, and they practice note taking, so they can be better at that. Also summarizing, like you listen to a lot of things and then you summarize it in 1 or 2 sentences, because they need to do that sometimes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Since we brought up jobs and careers, what kind of jobs can a translator have, or even an interpreter?
For interpreters, you can see them in a lot of places, like the big summits, conferences. We have them in Kuwait in the National Assembly, also in the Diwani Amiri. However, when it comes down to the translators, you will find them everywhere, literally, because each and every single ministry, you will have a department for translators where they actually need translators to translate something.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And what I'm curious about is how important are accents or dialects? Because, Mohammed, sometimes we run into someone that's translating but not with the best accent.
Exactly.
Yes, yes. Sometimes it can be a problem because, you know, when you are interpreting with your own accent, because that's whatever you learned the language with. But the problem is that sometimes you are actually not interpreting for only yourself or your audience, the Arabic or the English audience. You're interpreting, for example, if you're interpreting into Kuwaiti, and then someone from another country like Egypt or Syria, they're listening to you so they can interpret into another language, like let's say French, because sometimes it's a chain of interpreters. They interpret for one or more language, and then they cannot understand your accent. So here comes a lot of mistakes and problems. And sometimes it's the English accent, like, you know, if it's a British accent or it's an American accent. So that's why I always say enunciate and pronounce very loudly, like clearly, the letters instead of saying them in an accent, because sometimes people don't really know that accent and they want the you know, the simple English
letters.
Right.
Yeah. And I think she gave a really good example, which is Kuwaiti Arabic, or let's say Lebanese or another kind of Arabic. Things could really get lost. You know, it's very different. It does vary.
Exactly, exactly. Dr. Rita, let's go back to the plane again. But this time, like saying welcome to visitors, like when they visit Kuwait, especially during conferences, most of them, they put headphones or something to hear from translators. Does it happen like play by play, as they say, live, or it's recorded, the translation? Tell us more about it, how it happens, like
it depends. Sometimes the interpreter is lucky, and when they get hired, they're giving the transcript. So this is the transcript, so they have the time to translate it, and then they simply go there and read it. And sometimes they're not lucky. They go there and they face whatever they face. But eventually you will be told what the topic is about. So today we're talking about this issue, or agriculture, or petroleum, or the coronavirus, and something like that. So eventually you will know what you will be expecting. And with years of experience, you will know how to skip the things that you don't know how to translate. And you will know how to summarize the things, or make them sound simpler. You need to just, as an interpreter, we always say you need to just share the message, and that's the most important thing. And don't be stuck basically on one word, and then you forget everything else.
And I think that does happen to a lot of us, even sometimes on TV. If you get like stuck on one word and just focus on that,
say it,
you won't go on.
Exactly.
So finally, what are some of the difficulties that an interpreter might run into?
The most important thing or the most difficult part that a lot of translators or interpreters face is, what if we are stuck and everyone is listening to me and I don't know what to say? So I always tell them self-confidence is one of the most important things that you need to have as an interpreter, because when it comes down to a translator, no one is going to see you. They're going to see your work, they're going to see your book, but they're not going to see you, so you can hide. But when it comes down to an interpreter, you need to just be proud of yourself, because no one can do that. It's a very hard job. Not everyone can do it. So when you can do it, that's a good for you. So go ahead and rock it, and just be confident. That's all.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Dr. Asmaa, do you have any notes when it comes to dialect or accent, when it comes like for interpreters exactly? Is it anything you recommend to them when it comes to the accent or dialect? Is it important?
It's very important. Actually, I wanted to bring this up because I had an internship with my students in the National Assembly, and that was the first internship in Kuwait to train basically students to be interpreters. And they found it really difficult because it was dealing with things that they didn't know really how to do or say, sorry, in English. Yes. But they said, all the member of parliaments, they were speaking in the Kuwaiti dialect. Yes. We completely understand everything they say, but I don't know how to say it in another language. That's because they say like a little bit of words in, you know, like Quranic phrases, or, you know, the small little things that we say. So they couldn't really say it in English, and that's why
there is no translations for it.
There is no translation, so that's why dialects can be a little bit harder. So when you actually see someone speaking in a standard language, it would be way much easier for you.
Do you give them do you give them a note or tell them?
There are no notes. It's all them.
They have to go through the hard part.
Yeah, because each interpreter has their own notes.
Yes, and I think it's very true because especially with our Kuwaiti dialect, we have our old sayings and very old words that we still use till this day. And I cannot imagine having to translate that to anyone, Mohammed.
Let's try to do it someday.
Yeah,
maybe we can write a book about it.
I'll try to tell you one thing. You know, my students, they always say, doctor, they always mock us for studying translation because it's not important. I always tell them, go and tell those people, how can you translate mashallah? Just mashallah. Yes. How can you translate that? You will be surprised. You can translate it to wow, because, you know, when you say mashallah, you look nice, or you can say mashallah, you're late, like, oh, really, you're late?
Exactly.
So you can have different, and it's one word, but it has so many different meanings.
Definitely. That's very true. And I think that was a very good example to end with today, Dr. Asmaa. It was our absolute pleasure. And I personally really learned a lot about translators and interpreters.
Thank you.
Definitely. And thank you, Dr. Asmaa, for sharing this information regarding translation and interpreting also with us. And I really hope you enjoy your evening. And we wish you the best of luck with your future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
The viewers, we just had with us Dr. Asmaa Alduhaim, Assistant Professor of Translation. Let's go to our second report of the evening. It's about fine arts. Stay tuned.